Hi everyone, Lisanne here from DIK Kids again. I just want to welcome everyone to today's session where we are going to look at making a monument, and we're making the very famous monument of Newgrange in the Brunaboyne area of County Meath in Ireland. So I want to welcome all of our primary school children from Ireland and from those who are joining us from around the world. I especially would like to thank today the support from the Irish Heritage Council for these online Zoom sessions. And in addition, we're thrilled to have the support of News Talk in its Bank of Ireland Community Heroes. We are chuffed and thrilled. So today, Dr. Stephen Mandel is going to teach you a little about what it was like in the Stone Age in Ireland and who were these incredible people who built Newgrange, this amazing monument. So you're in for a real treat there. And then Dr. Francesca Cadedo is going to lead us in the making the monument. And so I hope you have the materials that we would have emailed to all of those on our mailing list. Alternatively, they're on our website at digitkids.ie. In the resources page, you'll be able to download the materials that you'll need for this. And in addition to that, this presentation video is also on our website, and you're probably watching it via YouTube. So that's great. I'm handing it over to Stephen now.
Well, thanks, Lisanne. I have to say I'm super excited about today because it's the Stone Age, and I love geology. I love rocks, and no better place for a person who loves rocks to be than in the Stone Age. So let's get the presentation started. So today we're going to be making a monument. So a monument is a building or a structure from the past that we think of as of value. So we'd never want to destroy it now because it's something that it means something to us. So good examples of monuments would be the Eiffel Tower or the Statue of Liberty or Big Ben. But in Ireland, we have lots and lots of monuments too. And the type of monument that we're going to be talking about today is a stone monument, okay? And of course, as Lisanne said, we're very pleased that the Heritage in Schools scheme has given us funding to make this workshop possible. And we also are very proud to have received a Community Heroes Award from Bank of Ireland and News Talk to help make this possible. So I'm going to bring you back to Pool na Brome, the Hole of the Sorrows, monument we looked at the very first day when we did our first workshop. Can you remember what it was for? So was it a giant's bed, a graveyard, or art? Well, I hope you remember that it was a graveyard. But what else could it have been for? Could it have been a temple, you know, like a church or a mosque or a synagogue? Or could it have been a table? Looks like a table. Or a library, maybe something to store books or where people used to go and study. Well, I hope you guessed that it was a temple. We don't know for sure because this is a time called prehistory. The Stone Age didn't write down their history, so we don't know for sure. But we think that they didn't just bury people here, that there was something more here, that they might have come here to celebrate events or to commemorate things, or it was something more important than just somewhere to bury people. But they're called, these types of monuments are called megalithic tombs, do you remember? So mega means huge, lithic means it's made of stone, and tomb is another word for a graveyard. So we talked last time about them being graveyards, but there may also be sort of like the church as well. So there's something more than just a burial place. Now, can you remember how old it is? 58 years, 580 years, or 5,800 years? Well, It's 5,800 years old. That's a really, really long time ago. So if it was built so long ago, who built them? Who built these tombs? What do you think? Do you think it was aliens? Some people believe that, you know. How about giants? Those stones are so huge. Could it have taken giants to build them? Or perhaps do you think it was just farmers, the farming people? Well, if you answered farmers, you're right. So when we say it was built by farmers, we meant it was built by the people who first brought farming into Ireland. So farming arrived in Ireland about 6,000 years ago. Up until then, people were just hunter-gatherers and they didn't know how to grow their own crops, keep animals and things like that. So once they developed farming, they were able to have time and resources to do things like build these monuments. So I started with Pool na Brone, that's 5,800 years ago. And they started building these all over Ireland. And they ended up building the greatest megalithic tomb there is. And some of you may know this, some of you may even have been here. This is Newgrange. And Newgrange is huge. It's almost the width of a football pitch across. It's enormous. And it was excavated by this man. His name is Professor Michael O'Kelly. And he excavated, I think he started in 1965, and it took 7 or 8 years to excavate the site. And it was a huge job because it was so complicated. But those of you who don't know, I need to tell you where it is first. It's in the heart of the Boyne Valley. The Boyne Valley is in the east coast of Ireland, just over there, north of Dublin. And it's this river valley, the River Boyne, that runs through the landscape and has so many incredible archaeological sites. They say that you can trace 9,000 years of human history by just taking a boat trip down that river. And in the heart of it all is our monument, Newgrange, in a bend in the Boyne there. It's called Bruna Boyne, the Palace on the Boyne. It's a beautiful, beautiful site. So, Newgrange. What we're going to focus on in this workshop is the building of this greatest monument. There are so many aspects to it. We're definitely going to return and do another workshop just on what it was for. But we're going to talk about the building of it today, and we're going to make our model of it. So it's 5,200 years old. About 600 years after they built Pool na Brone, they built this. And it's enormous. And just to put that in context of how old it actually is, these are the Great Pyramids. I'm sure you recognize them. And they were built 4,600 years ago. So that's 600 years after Newgrange. So when the people were building the Great Pyramids, Newgrange was already 600 years old. Do you recognize that place? That's Stonehenge Great Circle. It's a beautiful archaeological site. Very, very famous site. That was built 4,500 years old. 100 years after the pyramids and 700 years after Newgrange. So when you think about it, Newgrange was already really old when these guys were built. These guys are babies compared to them. That's what you got to understand. But to really understand Newgrange, we need to sort of look inside. So I have a drawing here that was drawn by a really clever artist that shows what it might have looked like when they were building it. And it allows us to study what it was made of. So first thing is, they're all called megalithic tombs, but this is a particular type of tomb called a passage tomb. And the reason we call it a passage tomb is because it was the long passage of time since it was built. Do you believe me saying that? That it's called a passage tomb because so much time has passed? Do you think that's true or false? Well, if you said true, you were wrong because it's false. It's called a passage tomb because it has a passage going into it. All of these types of tombs have a passage that goes into it. It's sort of like a tunnel. It makes it like a cave, and the passage leads to a big open chamber in the middle. So, what are the various parts that it's made of? First of all, it's made of a cairn. Now, that doesn't mean it's made of a small dog. It means a cairn is a word we have that describes a mound of stones that have been put there by humans. So sometimes you go to the top of a mountain and you'll see a pile of stones on top of it. That wasn't put there by nature. That's a cairn. But this is a cairn like no other cairn. It's 200,000 tons, metric tons of local stones that make up this huge mound. That's one heck of a lot of stones, okay? And can you imagine the work of gathering all those stones from the river? The river is over 500 meters away. Can you imagine how much effort would it take to carry all those stones up? So this workshop, we're using flour. And my bag of flour that I'm using is 2 kilograms in weight. Just to give you an idea of how much you need. Imagine we were making this monument out of bags of flour. So 1 ton is 1,000 kilograms. That means 1 ton is 500 of those big bags of flour. Can you imagine 500 of those big bags of flour? That means to make a monument the size of Newgrange, we would need 100 million bags of flour. That's just impossible to get your head around, okay? And not only did they have to make it out of the stones, they had to go and get the stones. So they had to walk 500 meters down to the river and then 500 meters back up the hill carrying piles of rocks. So let's imagine that each time you took a trip, and remember, you got to carry this for 500 meters, that you could bring 10 kilos, okay? That means it would take you 20,000 visits to the river and 20,000 trips, which is 500 meters one way, 500 meters the other. That's 10,000 kilometers. Sorry, that's 10 kilometers, 20,000 trips. Oh my goodness, I got confused. It's 20,000 kilometers. What else is it made of? If you think that gathering all those stones from the river is crazy, wait till you hear this. So all around the base, there's 97 huge stones. I'm just pointing them out there. But if you think about, we call them curb stones, and they call them curb stones because they're the exact same as the curbs on the footpath, the sidewalk, between the footpath and the road. You know the way there's a curb around it? Well, exactly the same way, there's a curb of stones around this monument. But these are huge stones. There are 42 that line the passageway. And overall, there are 547 huge stones, each over 1 meter tall, many of them over 2 meters tall. That's my friend Mersh O'Sullivan, Professor Mersh O'Sullivan, a fabulous archaeologist on the left there, standing outside Newgrange. Just to recap, these huge stones were used to make the curb that Mersh is standing beside, the passageway, which is like a wall into the chamber, the roof of the chamber, which is it's called a corbelled roof, all the stones are overlaying each other. And then there's a whole range of stones outside that are huge. So imagine 547 of these. So it's one thing putting up these 547 stones and putting them into place, and the work that it would require to put them into place is just hard to imagine. But when you realize where they came from, that's when you're really going to go crazy, okay? So this is an aerial photograph. It's a satellite view of Ireland, and that's the River Boyne. And up here at the top is a place called Clogherhead. Okay, so it's about 22 kilometers up the coast. What's that, about 14 or 15 miles? And that's where they got it from. So I'm going to ask you, how do you think they got the stones to Newgrange, all the way up from Clogherhead up here? How did they get them to Newgrange? Did they do it by airplane, by horse and cart, or by boat? Well, if you think they did it by plane, then I don't think there were many planes around 5,800 years ago or 5,200 years ago. But if you said horse and cart, you were also wrong for a few reasons. First of all, in Ireland, at this time when Newgrange was built, there were no horses. There were no wheels. The wheel hadn't arrived in Ireland yet. Can you imagine they built this thing when there wasn't a wheel? And also we didn't have roads. So to bring by horse and cart would have been impossible. So the only way that we went around was by boat or by walking. So the easiest way to get around is by boat. In a sense, they were our roads back then. So the answer is boat. So the boats would have looked something like this. Now that's a huge boat. I just wanted to show you a picture of it. But they were boats that were made of willow tied together and bent, and then animal skins. Very, very good boats. This type of boat is called a coracle. And you can imagine trying to put a huge stone inside one of those wouldn't be very effective. So we think that they probably tied them underneath and let the water hold their weight. And then they brought it by river, and that's the River Boyne there. Colored it in for you. So they would have started up in Clonhead, loaded them under the boats, and then made that journey down through the sea, all the way down the Irish coast. And then they would have had to paddle all the way up the River Boyne, all the way around the bend there, all the way to Newgrange. But of course, when they got there, they weren't finished because they still had to get up the hill. They didn't build it at the river, they built it up on the hill. And remember, they didn't have the wheel, so they probably used logs and just dragged them and rolled them along, and then they would have had to build ramps. It would have been a huge amount of effort to get all these stones in place. So that's two parts of the story. Here's another part. The front of it, do you see the way it's all white? That's because it's made of a type of rock. It's called quartz. And inside this quartz wall, there's also these round stones, and they're granodiorite. They're dark colored stones. And you notice the way the white ones are all jaggedy, whereas the dark ones, the dark gray ones, are all circular. And they're circular because they've been rolled in water. If you've ever been to a beach or in a river and you look at the stones there, because of the water, it rubs them round and round and round and round. They get eroded away and they get worn into these round cobble shapes. So those have come from a river, but they didn't come from the river close to Newgrange, the River Boyne. They came from much further afield. And so did the quartz. So this is the east coast of Ireland. There's Dublin City. Dublin's there. There's Newgrange. That's Clonhead, where they came from. They're where the large stones came from. But these stones came from further afield. So the quartz came from 75 kilometers away down in the Wicklow Mountains. And they would have to break it out of the rock there and carry it down to the coast and put it onto a boat. And the granodiorite came from Dundalk Bay. Luckily, that came from the coast, so they were able to just load it onto the boats. And they would have put their boats in the water and again started their slow march or their slow paddle all the way up and down the coast to get up the River Boyne. That's an incredible achievement. And why did they do that? Why did they go to so much trouble to gather the materials when they could have just used stone that was local to here? It's something that we find very, very difficult to understand. And because they didn't write down, we don't know. But we know that it meant something really important to them. So it's time for us to start making our model now. And I'm going to quickly go through the equipment we need and how we're going to go about doing it before handing over to Francesca. So here's our equipment list. If you don't have this downloaded from our website, you can just pause the screen and write it down. Put simply, we need 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of salt, and 75 milliliters of water for every model you're going to make. So get that ready. And by salt, we mean table salt, not thick, crusty salt, nice thin salt. You're going to need some baking paper because we've got to place this on baking paper to heat it. An A4 piece of, or a letter size piece of cardboard to place it on, and then we can use that as our base for our model. Scissors, because we have some cutting out to do, and a knife, like a butter knife, not a sharp knife, it's just to cut the salt dough. Then we're going to need some PVA glue, some paints. If you don't have paint, then you can use markers or coloring pencils, but we do need coloring pencils for part of our model. And if you're able to print off our two templates, then great. If not, what you're going to have to do is to sort of copy from the screen what we're going to do. So this is how we came up with our template. That's a picture from the sky of Newgrange. And we just drew an outline over it. And the first thing we did was, you can see you can see where the passage is inside it. Now, the passage in Newgrange only goes with about 60 feet, about a third of the way through. So we're exaggerating ours. We're going to make a much bigger chamber so that it looks a bit more realistic. We then drew the stones around the outside. So when you take all that apart, that's what we got. That's our template. So this is what you need to copy. Just so you know, this width here is about 14 centimeters, okay? That's the size model we're making for the amount of Play-Doh we have. Don't forget the entrance stone. And the other template we use, if you have it, great. If not, really what you're doing is you're making a copy of the last one, but you're making it about a centimeter bigger all the way around. And finally, you're going to need a little circle about 4 centimeters wide. So I'm going to hand the screen over to Francesca, and we're going to get started on our craft.
Hey guys! So now it's time to start with the craft. You will see my hands doing the crafts, and we all make the monument together, and we will follow Steve's instructions. So I'll switch my camera.
Okay, so I'm going to give out the instructions, guys. So you should have 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of salt. We're going to mix in the bowl are 100 grams of flour, 100 grams, I'll let you do that. Wow, you really label those really beautifully, Francesca.
Thank you, Steve.
So now we get our 100 grams of salt, and we pour that in as well. If there's more than one kid in a household, you need 100 grams of each per salt dough model. So if there's 2 kids, you need 200 grams of salt and 200 grams of flour. Okay, Francesca, you're going to mix it all up. So you just with a wooden spoon, or you can just mix it all up. Excellent. Now, the next thing we need is 75 milliliters of water. But we're not going to put it all in at once. We're just going to put in maybe 25 mils of water at the start. Or just a small bit of it at the start. The idea is you don't just pour it all in. You pour in a little bit at first, and then with your wooden spoon, mix it all up. Oh, something I should have said is, guys, you're now working with water and flour and salt right beside your computer. So be very careful, okay? You don't want to muck up your laptops or your computers.
So I'm mixing my 25 milliliters of water.
Okay, is it mixed up?
Not yet.
Not
I
yet.
need more water.
Yeah, and okay. So another 50 mils of water then. Or the rest of your water. Put the rest of your water in. But put it in gently and then mix it up, and it'll start to change consistency. It'll go from being powdery to being gloopy. It does feel like you're making a cake, but believe me, this would be the most disgusting cake ever. It's horrible. And that amount of salt would be really bad for you. Once it looks like it's all mixed up the way Francesca's is, then you can start using your hands. And what you're going to do is sort of knead it together. This is, Francesca is an expert at this because this is the same way you make, pizza dough. So this is something that being Italian really helps when you're doing this.
I can do dough with my eyes closed.
Yeah. If your hands sort of feel sticky and it keeps sticking to them, just put your hands in a little bit of flour, and that'll help it from sticking to you so it's not too gloopy.
So mine is still a little bit too floury. See? So I'm adding a little bit of water. I still had some of my 75 milliliters.
What we want it to become is like a ball of dough. That's what we want it to be like. So we don't want it to be too sticky. We don't want it to be too dry. We don't want it to be flaky. It needs to be a nice solid bowl, like if you're making a snowball. You know, when you're making a snowball and sometimes the snow is too wet and it's too mushy, and then sometimes it's too powdery. This needs to make a good solid ball. So if yours ends up being too gloopy, too wet, add a bit of flour. If it ends up being a little bit too dry and flaky, add a little bit of water, but only do it tiny bit by tiny bit, okay? If you put too much, then you'll just end up making more and more and more.
She's just going to keep kneading it. Can you see the word written down in front of her? She's
you
on.
need to knead.
You need to knead.
One of the problems I had when I was making mine, I don't know why, but it kept sticking to my hands. So I found it very helpful to just put a bit of flour on my hands.
And somebody else has asked, what amount is perfect? So Francesca, what should it feel like?
It should feel like the gray clay that you use, like the DAS, I don't know the name, DAS.
Okay.
The modeling clay?
The modeling clay, exactly. It should be soft, but firm. Can you see how my hands, it should be like Play-Doh.
Good.
In the meantime, I can show you the secret of my family to knead the dough.
Oh, okay, shall we?
Like this. So
This
it's
is
transversal. So you squish it in one way, then you rotate, and then you squish it the other way.
And that makes nice pizza?
Yeah.
I really want a pizza now.
We can share the recipe of a pizza.
Yeah, let's not make a monument. Let's change the recipe and make pizza instead. This would be a disgusting pizza.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Don't eat this, guys. The salt in it would be terrible for you.
So Francesca, what I need you to do, and anyone who's ready, is you're going to break off about a half of maybe 3/4 of the dough. Yeah, a little more than half, maybe. And then keep the big bit. Put the small bit to one side and keep the big bit. And then I need you to bring your template. So this, Francesca, can you show me your template? That's the template. So it's the one that we have. It says templates for model at the top. And hopefully if you either have that printed out or you've made one like that. If you haven't, you're just going to need the next thing that everybody's going to need a piece of greaseproof paper. So have you got a piece of greaseproof paper there, Francesca? And you just put the baking paper just goes on top like that, so you can see underneath it.
Oh, and by the way, I just put a little bit of cardboard, light cardboard underneath if you have it.
Yeah,
So
if you don't worry.
model.
It just makes it easier to move around. Okay. So I'm just going to give people a few moments to catch up with that. And just so to tell you what we're going to be doing, Francesca is going to be making the mound with using this as a template. Okay. If you don't have a template at all, then you're just going to make a mound that's approximately 14 centimeters across. Okay. So is that right? Did I say the right measurement?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. And it's slightly heart-shaped. So Francesca, take your big piece of Play-Doh and squish it down on in the middle of the monument, yeah? And now you're going to squish it to make the shape of the line. Can you see the line underneath, everyone? Where Francesca is showing you. So you're going to squish it out into that shape. So mine's being painted. We are going to paint it at the end. So here's my model. So all we've done is this part so far. But and we're going to add all the other bits out of salt dough as well. So I'll take off my lid.
So cool.
So that's what we're going to be finished up with. And then we even have the cover. Okay. There you are. So how are we doing? Okay. If you don't have the paper, just make it about that shape. So a sort of oval shape about 14 centimeters across. So 14 centimeters is about 5.5 inches. Yeah, and it's slightly bigger across than it is lengthways, or than it is in width, in depth. And it should be about maybe a centimeter and a half in thickness. If you don't have the paper. Okay. So the next part, you're going to need a knife, but not a sharp knife, just a, Francesca's actually using a tweezers, but it's just because the end of it works very well just to be able to cut out of it. She could have also used her ruler that she had. So you just need something, even a plastic knife, because of course what we're cutting is just salt dough, so it's not hard. So what we're doing now, someone asked, well, do we cut out the cross? We're cutting out the cross. Of course, the difficulty with cutting out the passage, it's not actually a cross, it's a cross shape, is that we can't see it. So we understand that it's quite a tricky thing to do. So the way we know where to go is, can you see the entrance stone? See, it should be at the very, there, where Francesca is pointing now. So really it's at the sort of, it's at the middle of the heart part of the thing. So Francesca, do you want to cut out a bit and watch what Francesca's doing, and then you can copy her? So she is going to make a cut like that, maybe about 1.5 centimeters wide. All right, 1.5 centimeters to 2 centimeters.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be nice and wide because remember, this is a model. We're not trying to make it exactly to scale. And you go in nearly to the halfway in, and just cut. Don't worry about taking it out yet. You're just going to make your cuts. And cut all the way to the bottom, okay? And don't worry if little bits tear off, like a bit tore off for Francesca there. That's fine, because you can mold it afterwards. That's the great thing about working with salt dough, is you can sort of patch it up. So once you've done the long bit, now we're going to make the cross part. So Francesca is going to go on the right-hand side first.
Would they be the same size?
No, the right-hand side, in all of these passage tombs, nearly all of these passage tombs, for some reason, the right arm is bigger. We think that they thought that the right side was more important. But in these passage tombs, the right side was usually the bigger side. And then the left one. So don't worry about taking it out yet. We're just going to make a cross shape. And then do the top bit. Okay, so once you cut, and make sure you cut all the way to the bottom. Francesca, I'll let you describe what the best way to take it out is.
So with my tweezers or my knife or the ruler, it's the same. I'll try to go below the cross I made, and I'll try to remove as much dough as I can. Can you see? Like this. And you can see it's not perfectly shaped now, but no worries. With your knife, you can smooth the edges. Can you see what I'm doing?
Yeah, you just need to tidy it up. That's the great thing about salto, is you can tidy up if you make a boo-boo.
Exactly.
Yeah. Make sure it's nice and wide. And don't worry, it doesn't have to be exactly the same as the cross that's drawn on the template. It's just a cross shape, because the actual passage in Newgrange only goes up a third. It goes 60 feet or 20 meters or so into the passageway.
I wanted to say a couple of things. So we're making Newgrange, right? And Newgrange is this wonderful, and you're going to show us the model again, Francesca, of how it looks. So Stephen told you that Newgrange was made by farmers, but Irish mythology tells us a different story. I love telling stories from Irish mythology. And in the story of Irish mythology, Newgrange was made by the Tuatha Dé Danann king, Dagda, and he made it with his followers, made it for him. And he gave it to his son Angus Og to live in. So it's a slightly different story than, and people used to tell that about Newgrange, who made it. Some people used to think it was made by giants, because how else could they have gotten those big stones up there? But mostly in the Irish stories, Newgrange and all the various different palaces as such that were made, they called it Dagda's palaces, and all over Ireland there are places that are known as the homes of the Dagda, and he usually gave those homes to his many children.
Francesca's making hers absolutely perfect. That's very Francesca.
I can stay idle.
Okay.
What the next stage we do actually takes a good bit of time. It's quite straightforward, but it takes quite a lot of time. So Lisanne's going to tell us a story in it. So if you're still doing the cross and everything, if you stop for a minute and watch Francesca's next step, then Lisanne's going to be telling us a story, so we'll have time to you'll have time to catch up. So now we're going to make the curb stones. Remember, the curbs are the stones around the edges. So Francesca, I need you to get a small piece, maybe a quarter of that, just a small piece of Play-Doh. Yes, maybe about that much. To keep the small piece, put the big piece to one side. Yeah. And now this is something that even I could do with Play-Doh. And when I was asked to make animals with Play-Doh, the animal I always made was a snake. So what you're going to do is you're going to make a snake. And the snake should be the thickness of a pencil.
Something like this?
Yes, perfect. Yeah. So you just roll it out until it's the size of a pencil. So you might need to make yourself a bit of space, Francesca, there. Hopefully you guys have a little bit more space. So we're making a snake. And it's a snake that's going to go around the base of Newgrange.
But not whole.
Yep. Not whole.
Steve, there are no snakes in Ireland.
Yes, I know. We're only pretending that well, I have two answers to that. One is, of course, these are not snakes. We're just making a snake so we can do stones. The other answer is this was made before St. Patrick got rid of the snakes in Ireland.
Oh, but technically what we're making now are the curbstones, right?
Yes, we're making each one of these stones that we're going to make is going to be the size of your little pinky fingernail. But actually, what it represents is a stone that's nearly 2 meters in size.
So I have my snake. So what should I do now?
Now what you need to do is you need to cut it into little segments, and each segment should be the size of your little pinky nail. So maybe
Like
cut
this?
2 or 3 of them. Yep. So maybe cut 1 or 2, a few of them until we know. Yeah. Don't worry if you haven't cut. If you're not finished making your snake, just watch Francesca for a minute and she'll do this, and then you can catch it. Yeah. So now you're just going to, yeah, you've got one of your stones. That's one of your huge stones. So I want you to place that around the curb of the Newgrange. So there, she started at just at the passageway there. Do you see where she's put it? Once she made her snake, Francesca then cut, the snake is about the thickness of a pencil, and then she cut a piece off that's about the size of her pinky fingernail. And that's going to be one of the huge stones. And each of those stones, she's going to roll a bit so that they're not all jaggedy, and she's going to place them in a circle against the outer end of the monument, of our monument. So you can see she's done 3 or 4. So now what we need to do is we need to do that all the way around. And because that takes quite a long time, the sign's going to tell us a story, at least start a story.
Yeah, I'll start a story while you guys are busy cutting out little pinky things and size and do that. So again, I was going to tell you about Newgrange and the people who made it in Irish mythology. So it was made by the Dagdas, who is this incredibly friendly, father-like king of the Tuatha De Danann. And when he used to build palaces everywhere, and the people who used to build them for him were his own people. Now, the Dagda had many, many wonderful magical possessions, and one of his possessions was known as the cauldron of plenty. So a cauldron is like a big iron pot. It's round and it goes over a fire, and it has a lid on the top of it. So it was like his own cauldron. It was he cooked beautiful food, and it was a magical cauldron. In fact, if anybody got anywhere near the cauldron, and they would smell the most delicious smell they had ever smelled leaking out from it. And no matter whether they just finished their breakfast or anything, a hunger would come upon them, and their mouths would start watering, and they got this delicious sense of anticipation that they were going to have the most delicious meal they had ever tasted in their life, and they couldn't wait for that to happen. Now, Newgrange took a long time to build, just as your little model is going to take a relatively short time to build. Newgrange, we think, could have taken as long as 80 years to build, but the Dagda was able to do that, and in the meantime, he was able to feed all of the builders with his cauldron, and this is how it happened. In order to make the crops grow really well, he used to cook up something in his cauldron that was a sort of a bluish color, and it was very liquidy and bluish color. Think about Miracle-Gro for those of you who have parents who like to garden. And he used to tip the bluish thing into the ground around the Bruneboyne, which was this magical landscape. And it would spread out over all the lands in what was the province of Meath. It would spread out, it now includes Westmeath, it would spread into County Kildare, it would spread all over County Meath. And the, the, the food that the farmers were growing, like oats and barley and wheat and apple trees and hazelnut trees, would all start to grow an abundance of food. Instead of having 100 apples on the apple trees, there would be 700 apples. Instead of having 14 sacks of oats from the small acre of ground, they had 1,400 sacks of oats. So no matter where when he tipped his blue stuff out, the crops would grow amazing and the grass would grow really thick and luscious. And the cattle gave the best milk, and the butter was so creamy and delicious that it was just there was an abundance of food. So all the farmers were able to bring the food, and it was cooked in the cauldron of plenty. And every evening when they sat down to have a shared meal together, they would do that in the Dagda's great hall. And his hall was fabulous. It was so exotic, with torches lighting up everywhere. And there was a beautiful oak table in which there was so much food. And there was a chair for everyone at the table who was involved in the building of Newgrange, and for all their family, for all their children. Everybody could sit down and enjoy a meal at the cauldron. And the servants brought plates of food out that were heaped with the most delicious food that anybody had ever tasted. And if anybody wanted more, they'd just raise their little pinky and say the magic word, please, and the servants would come and put heaps more food on their plate. So people could have seconds or thirds or even fourths if they wanted. And the magical thing about the cauldron is that no matter how much people wanted, there was always more. In the middle of the meal, the Dagda would always stand up with his big smile on his face, and he always used to play this little joke on everybody. He would say to everybody, "Now, nobody leaves until it's all finished." But of course, everybody would chuckle because they knew that there was no way anybody could ever finish all of the cauldron, because it never, ever, ever emptied. And it was one of the most important things in Irish treasure was his cauldron, because as long as the cauldron was in the country, the Dagda could pour out the blue miracle stuff on the ground, and all the crops would grow very well, and the grass would be green, and their animals would be well fed, and the whole people in the country would be well fed. So that was one of the most important gifts that the Tuatha De Danann had. But he had other gifts as well, the Dagda. And I think that I'm just going to pause the story for now, and we're going to catch up with how Francesca is doing and how all of you are doing the curbs stones. Francesca, how are you doing, and what have you done here? Do you want to tell us?
Yes, so I completed the curbstones. I put the curbstones all around my Newgrange shape.
Yeah, they look great. They got bigger as you went further around and around, but that's okay.
Yes.
They got a little fatter. I'm sure some of you are still working away. It's quite, Francesca is really, really quick at doing this. She's an expert. I find it quite difficult sometimes that it sort of sticks to my hands, and then I try to put it down on the, and then it comes off with my hand or bits glue away. So don't worry if it takes a little bit of time to get it right. And remember my tip about putting some flour on your hands so that it doesn't stick to your hands as much. It's nice. And I see there's a lot of kids there who are waiting or just playing with the Play-Doh. I love playing with the Play-Doh as well. I'm actually don't have any with me at the moment because I used all of mine to make my model, but I'm sorry. So let me see, how are we getting on? The curbstones, just if they're not sticking, just squish them in a bit, and when it goes in the oven, it will stick. Is there another way of getting them to stick a bit more, Francesca? A bit of.
Yes, you can actually, like if you have a little bit of water left, like very little, like this, just wet your fingers. So it's exactly the opposite of the flour. If it's too dry, just wet a little bit your fingers and it will get stickier. So you can stick your stones.
So just watch Francesca for a little bit, and she is going to take another piece of Play-Doh and make another snake.
How much, Steve?
Oh, sorry. About half of what you've got in your hand now. So don't worry if you haven't finished your curbstone. Just watch Francesca for the moment, and we'll explain the next stage, and then you can finish your curbstones and your and this next step while Lisanne is telling the story. And before we go to the step after this, we'll make sure everyone's caught up. So all she's doing is making another snake, the same, just like what you're going to do is make another snake and cut it into little stones. So maybe, yeah, anyone who's ready can do that. And before we move on to actually making the passage, we'll take a pause. So if you have already finished the curbstones, just make another snake.
How thick?
Again, the same size as a pencil.
Perfect. So like this.
Yes. I always underestimate how long a pencil you can make when I pick up a piece of dough. It's amazing how much it spreads out.
This is actually also how you make gnocchi.
Oh, and then you have to twist it, don't you?
No.
No?
Not really, not exactly. Not too much, at least.
And gnocchi is potato, isn't it?
Yes.
Sorry, we're talking about Italian food. Love Italian food.
It's reminding me of the dagda and the delicious cauldron of food. Oh my goodness, the most magical thing about it was that every time somebody tasted the food from the cauldron, it was more delicious than the last time.
Wow, I'd go last. Okay, so again, Francesca is going to make little stones the same as she did before.
Same size?
Same size, yeah.
Perfect. And what should I do with them?
Make 3 of them and I'll show you.
Perfect.
Okay, so anybody who's still making the curbstones, just watch for a minute, and we will show you how we're going to make the passage stones. And these are called, there's a very big word for these, it's called an orthostat. And an orthostat is an upright stone. So they made the passageway and they put huge stones along them. If you're going to Newgrange, you see them. And they were like the walls of the passageway. So these stones are for that. So the stones you did for the curbstone went sideways. These stones are going to be upright. So they're going to be like that, tall.
Like this?
Yes, and you push them in and you stick them to the side like that. And the way I like to do it is I do one side completely first. So you just line them up, and
I'll
she's
line
going.
3,
Uh,
and I'll try to show you from
Yeah.
another point of view.
what they look like. Okay.
What do you think?
That's a good idea.
They do look like pillows. Somebody said they look like pillows. I wouldn't sleep on them though, it would get stuck in your hair.
Let's see if I can change the perspective.
You're like an eagle flying in. So there's the curbstones are on their side, but the orthostats are standing upright. Do you see the way they're slightly higher than the passage? So what Francesca's going to do, and what you guys are going to do while Lisanne's telling the next part of the story is, she's going to keep making those upright stones for the passageway, not the cross part, but the long part. So maybe 5 stones on each side. And then she'll do the other side of the passage too.
Great.
So so sorry, Lisanne, I'm going to hand over to you now. So what you're going to work on now, while Lisanne's been telling you the next part of the story, is finish your curved stones and then do the upright stones. And don't do the cross part. Just to Francesca, can you show them to where you do it? See on either side where Francesca's fingers are. On either side of the cross, you just do the long part of the cross. Don't do the other part. Our model we don't really have the space to fit them on those parts. There are stones in there, but we don't have the space to do them. So I'm going to hand over to Lisanne.
Okay. Well, I told you about the Dagda's cauldron, but actually I think he had a possession that was even more wonderful than the cauldron. The Dagda had a magical harp. Do you know what a harp is, guys? It's a musical instrument that sounds a bit like this. I don't know if you can hear it. The thing is that the Dagda was the only person that could make any sounds on his harp. He was the only, nobody else could make a single sound on the harp. His harp was made from the wood of a beautiful old oak tree. And it was said that that oak tree was magical in itself. So his harp was magical. It was painted with gold and silver designs all over it, swirls and spirals and lozenges and different designs. And it also had jewels in the stand of the harp. It had red rubies and gold diamonds and yellow amber, and it had blue sapphires. So it was really a very special and precious possession of the Dagdas. But despite it just being precious, it also kept the whole world in order, because before the Dagda got his harp, sometimes the world went crazy and the seasons didn't come at the right time. And there would be some years that the summer just didn't come at all, that they seemed to only have winter that lasted for a whole year, which was terrible. And the world would be covered in snow and no crops would grow. But when the Dagda played his harp, the seasons came in the right order. The start of the Celtic year, when the Dagda was around, was when the winter solstice was the start of the new calendar year. And after that, we had spring, where all of the crops were planted in the ground. And after that, we had the summer, just like today we still do. And the autumn, where they brought in all of the farmers brought in their crops and they stored them away. So by playing his harp, the Dagda kept the seasons in order, and that was very important. But more than just that, the Dagda would love to play it in the evenings when he had a big party and all of the workmen would come to the feast. The Dagda would play the harp, and he could play tunes on the harp that would affect how people felt. For instance, he had a special tune called Mirth. I don't know if you know what mirth is, but it's when you are laughing so hard you can't stop. It's like a fit of the giggles that catches and it spreads around the room, and then it goes so bad that your sides start to hurt and your feet start to tap and you can't sit still at all. And that's what happened. When he would play the mirth, people would laugh so hard it felt like they were being tickled. And they would eventually, they couldn't bear it anymore, so they'd beg the Dagda to stop. And as the music died down, they'd go, oh no, that felt so good. And so they'd beg him to start playing the music again. And he would, until everybody was exhausted from all of that laughter. But they felt good having laughed that loud. He also played the music of joy. And when he played the music of joy, people forgot for days afterwards. They couldn't think of a single sad thought. In fact, he thought that they would walk around with a smile right inside their hearts, and they would laugh and they would think the world was a wonderful place. Sometimes the Dagda played the music of sorrow, and when he played it, people's eyes would fill up with tears and they'd roll down their faces, and even though their hearts felt sad, and their moms usually gave them a cuddle, or their brother and sister put their hand on their shoulder. They also thought the music was very beautiful and that every tear was like a precious jewel. The Dagda could play many, many tunes on his harp. And one of the tunes that he used to play, which was, gosh, I wish he'd play it now, is that when moms and dads were very stressed and all over the world and children were afraid of things, he would play the music of courage. And when he played the music of courage, people would stop feeling so scared and they would get this sense of I'm a champion inside their hearts, and they would actually rush. They would uh, thunder into their work, and it would be like they could get uh, they were like a machine. They could get so many things done, and they would do it with a sense of grit and bravery, and there would be no more worries. And they loved that music because when that music came along, it took away all of their worries. And sometimes moms and dads find it hard to sleep, and sometimes little children find it hard to sleep because they're so busy. And when that would happen, the Dagda would play his sleeping music. And his sleeping music was really soft. It was like, think about as quiet as the sound of leaves, of wind blowing through the leaves of the trees. It was as quiet as the sound of a soft wave breaking on the sand of the shore. And this lovely feeling would come over people, and it would spread over their heads, and their eyes would get heavy and their bodies would relax. And it was like being wrapped up in a warm blanket that smelled of lavender and having somebody press a kiss to their forehead, and they'd fall into a deep, peaceful slumber. So when people in Ireland were stressed back then, and the Dagda played his sleeping music, the whole land would fall into a deep, peaceful sleep. Have you made the orthostats? That was a big word, Steve. The
Yes.
orthostats were the big stones that were standing upright on the inside of the passage.
Yes, and these stones are huge. It's incredible to think how they managed to put them all in place. And what we're going to learn on a different day is why they put them in the place they put them and how accurate they were. They just didn't build it. They knew where every single one was going to go, and every single one of them had a purpose. I'm going to just talk to you through the next stage while Francesca's doing it. So guess what, Francesca, I want you to make.
I read your mind, and I think I'm going to make a snake again.
No, this time we're going to make a fat worm.
Oh,
So
dun, 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 dun.
So the worm should be about the thickness of a pencil. And this time we're going to cut it into space, into stones the size of maybe your index finger, your pointing finger. Yeah. You're gonna cut maybe 5 stones. Francesca's going to need 5 stones. So you're just going to do, Francesca's just going to do 1 for the moment and show us where it's going to go. You see the way you did your orthostats, your upright stones? They need a cover, and this is called a lintel stone. And this stone goes across the top. Now, Emily, I think, and Francesca also had the cool idea, if it's not sticking well, just put a little dab of water on top of the orthostats before you put it down, and it will stick very nicely. So can you see she's covered it up, and it makes that nice passage? So you're going to need another 4 of those, Francesca, to finish yours.
Okay, so this is the step, guys. See, this is the name of these stones. So, 5.
Okay, everybody. So Francesca's just going to keep doing that to nice fat lintel stones that you're making. And I was going to tell you about one terrible thing that happened one time when the Dagda actually and the Tuatha Dé Danann, which are these people from Irish mythology from way, 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 way back, who were making Newgrange and other monuments all over Ireland. They had enemies, and their enemies were tricky people called the Fomorians. And the Fomorians wanted to take Ireland for themselves and make the Tuatha Dé Danann go away. But the Tuatha Dé Danann were great fighters, so they didn't go away. And the Fomorians were always attacking them. So the Fomorians came up with a plan, actually, and they stole the Dagda's harp, and they took it far, far away across the country to where they had a great big camp. And they also had about 20,000 soldiers in the camp. And they put a guard on the harp, and they hung the harp up on the wall of their camp, which is a bit like a castle in the middle of their camp. And all of these soldiers were put on a job of guarding the harp so that the Dagda couldn't get his harp back. Oh, wow, Francesca, that's really cool. Amazing. We're looking at a side view now of the passage, and you've got a nice little tunnel going on there. Anyway, when the Dagda came home one evening and they were all sitting around having a feast, they noticed that the harp was gone because the Dagda wanted to play it. And he was horrified to find that his harp was missing. So he said, "Oh my goodness, what am I going to do?" He said, "Well, who will come with me to get the harp back? We need to get it back from the Fomorians." So immediately one of his best soldiers, his name was Lou, said, "I'll go with you." And also Oma said, "I'll go with you." So the 3 of them set out on their way across Ireland, and they traveled across the mountains, and they traveled on the ancient routeways of Ireland. the ancient roads of Ireland, until eventually they traveled all day, until eventually in the evening time, as it was getting dark, they looked down from their mountainside and they saw the Fomorians' camp. And as they looked close, they could see the harp in the middle of the camp, hanging on the wall of the castle. And Oma said, uh-oh, there's about 20,000 soldiers there, and there's only 3 of us. How are we going to get the harp back? But the Dagda stood up, and he stretched his hands out, and he cried, "Come to me, my harp." And the harp jumped off the wall, and it ran, as only a harp can, "Ee-oo, ee-oo, 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 ee-oo," and it ran towards the Dagda. Now, as soon as the harp jumped off the wall, the Fomorians were like, "Hey, the harp is trying to escape. Let's get it, quick, 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 quick." But the harp was faster, "Ee-oo, ee-oo, 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 ee-oo," as it ran towards the Dagda and sprung into his arms. So the Fomorians picked up their swords and they picked up their axes, and they 20,000 soldiers started to run at Oma, the Dagda, and Lou. And Lou said to the Dagda, "I think you'd better play your harp." So the Dagda struck the notes on his harp, and immediately he played the sound of mirth, and they couldn't help it. The Fomorians dropped their swords, they dropped their axes, and they started to giggle, and they started to fall on the ground, and their feet started to tap, 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 and they couldn't help but laughing. They were helpless. They couldn't run after him at all. In fact, they were rolling around, holding their tummies. They were laughing so hard, and the Dagda kept playing the sounds of mirth until eventually the Fomorian said, "Stop, stop, stop." And when the music died away, instead of letting the Dagda go, the Fomorians picked up their swords and they picked up their axes and they started to rush after the Dagda and Lou and Oma and the harp. And so Lou said, "I think you better play something else." And so the Dagda strummed his harp, and out came the music of sorrow, and all the Fomorians started to cry, and the children wailed, and the soldiers covered their heads with their cloaks because their tears were flowing down their face until their actual cloaks were sopping wet. And they lay on the ground and they cried until eventually, when the music died away, the Dagda thought, "We are safe now to go away." But no, they grabbed their swords, and they grabbed their axes, and they picked up and they rushed towards the Dagda again. And Lou said, "I think you better play your harp." And so the Dagda played, and he played the sound of peaceful sleep. And even though the Fomorians didn't want to go to sleep, their eyes got heavy, and the sleep fell on them like a blanket, and it weighed them down, and they couldn't help it. They just fell to the ground into a deep and peaceful sleep. And as the Dagda walked away back to his palace on the Boyne, the Brú na Boyne, all the Fomorians were in a deep sleep, and never again was the harp stolen. Never again. And that's the end of that story.
Cool. The next step is are we going to do the basin stones? Which one are we going to do? The basin stones. So inside, and this is something we'll talk about in another session on Newgrange, but we're just going to make them from now because it's the only time we can make them. Inside Newgrange, inside each of the bits of the cross, the ends of the cross, there's a basin, and that's where they found the cremations, the bits of dead bodies that were buried there. So they're quite easy to make, but they're a little bit tricky. So you need a tiny little piece of dough, just a little smidgen, a snip, even less than that, half of that. So only about the size of, again, the size of your little pinky nail, because it has to fit in that. Okay. And now what you're going to do is you're going to sort of mold it over your pinky finger, as if you're making a, any of you guys do sewing, a thumbnail, a thimble, sorry, if you
A
guys
cup
do
for
sewing.
your fingernail. A cup
So
for your pinky finger.
Yeah.
A
Just
hat.
a little hat. And so it's a little bowl, and that is going to go inside the end of your course like that. And you can use your knife to push it down a bit. Excellent. So you need to do 3 of those. One of the really cool things about Newgrange that we know, if you go into Newgrange, the next time, if you haven't been, you have to go, or if you've been, go again. And next time you're in there, when you go down and look inside the chambers and you're inside that little end, the end, it's quite big in there, like 20 people could fit in there. Look into each of the corners of the cross. Those basins are huge. And when you're there, if you look at them, they're really, really big. And if you look down the passageway, you'll realize that they're bigger than the passageway. So they couldn't have brought them in after they built the passageway. They wouldn't have fit. So they would have had to have put them in there and then built the monument around them.
Wow.
So they must be a really important part of the monument. Luckily, we have a giant Francesca who can just put it over her finger and put it in, like you guys are. So that's the 3 of those. The next step is the roof, and this is quite a tricky step. So we're just going to do our best, but it starts off easy because we need to make a
Snake.
snake. Yes, we need to make a snake, but this snake's going to be a little bit fatter. So use half of your dough maybe. And then
How thick?
about the thickness of a marker maybe.
Something like this?
Yeah, a little bit thicker than the pencil, but not too thick. And we're just going to roll a snake out. It's going to be about, yeah. We're going to need with this to make about 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 10 stones. Now, when we gave you guys, those of you who have the templates, the other sheet of paper has a little circle on it, if you have that. And what we want you to do is to put that little circle underneath your greaseproof paper. If you don't have a circle, the circle is 4 centimeters across and doesn't need to be a perfect circle. So you're basically going to make something that's 4 centimeters across, but you're going to make it on top of your greaseproof paper because this is going to have to go to the oven as well. So if you don't have a little circle, don't worry about it. You're just going to make something. And the idea is it's going to cover the crucifix shape. It's going to cover the arms of the cross. So you're going to make stones that are a little bit bigger than the other stones you've been making. So they're fatter and they're also thicker. So Francesca's going to make them.
Something like this?
Yes.
And where should I put it?
So put it, you're going to make the outside or the inside of the circle, or so place it on the what we can see of the circle. So you're just going to, instead of it being a circle that's drawn, it's a circle of salt dough.
Of salt dough stones.
Yeah.
Something like this?
Yeah. So what we're making here, guys, is the corbelled roof. And this roof is one of the most incredible roofs that has ever been made in human history. Because this roof was made by layering stone after stone after stone on top of each other with a little bit of an overlap. So you know the way if you look at the roof of your house and it has slates on it, each slate is put over the slate that's lower than it, so that when the rain comes down and lands on your roof, it doesn't leak in, it just goes over the slates. Well, they use that principle, but with huge stones. And the most incredible thing about Newgrange is, even though it was built 5,200 years ago, not one drop of water has got into the chamber since that it was built. Now, can you imagine a builder today who could build a building that wasn't going to leak in 5,200 years? That's incredible workmanship. So once you've done one complete circle, like that, we're going to cut more to make the next circle. Again, the same sort of size stones.
And should I put them?
Yeah, so you're going to put them, but hang on, Francesca, slow down for a second. So Francesca didn't put it directly on top of the next stone. If you pick up your stone that you're going to put on, Francesca, she puts it with a little bit of an overlap. So it goes in and it's overlapping the ones underneath. So she's basically, what she's going to do is she's going to make another circle. You're going to make another circle, but a little bit smaller. But I know this is a really tricky. Francesca, what's the best thing you could just put your salt dough model as it is in the fridge and leave it in the fridge, and then you can finish it afterwards.
Yes, you can even leave it outside.
Okay.
And cover the rest of your salt dough. Keep it in a
cling film
Ziploc bag.
Or a Ziploc bag, yeah.
So it stays soft.
And if you're having trouble making the bold things, just put a small little piece of Play-Doh into the three corners. So Francesca managed to make hers very easily. Just because, remember, this model is going to be tiny. So just put a small little piece of salt dough in the bottom. Just break a tiny piece off and just put it into the bottom, into the corner of the cross parts.
So receive.
You made the bowl so beautifully, but some people had a bit of difficulty. So if it's too difficult, you just need to take a little piece of salt dough and put it in those three corners.
Actually, you can also use your knife and do something like this.
Yeah, just.
So make a little ball of dough and just push the center a little bit with a knife.
So we call them bowl stones, but they weren't bowls. They look like bowls there. We called them bowl stones because that's the shape they were, but they were huge stones. Yeah, so anyone who's finished 2 rows, you don't need to do a 3rd row. What you're going to do is you're going to make the capstone. So you're going to make a big stone that covers up, make a sort of flat piece of stone. So Francesca's going to make a big flat stone like that, and then it just goes on top, so it covers. But be careful not to push it down because your structure will collapse. So put it on very gently, just the way Francesca's done there. Don't push it too hard, it'll break. Awesome. Now remember, folks, this is the 3rd one that Francesca has made. So I'm looking at this and I'm looking at my model and going, it's not fair. Hers looks so good. But remember, this is her 3rd go. So we're learning every time we make it, you learn a little bit more. So compare it to her first one. So. Okay, so how many? 2 rows? Yeah, 2 layers is fine. You just need to, if there's a gap, if there's no gap after 2, after 2 stones, then it's fine, it's finished. But if there's still a gap, just make a flat stone and put it on top very gently, because if you push down, it'll break. So we're really very close to being finished our models, and certainly the part that's going to go in the oven. There's last thing we're going to need to do is, do you see the way there's black dots on your template? So Francesca will point them out, the black dots. They're the huge standing stones that are all the way around the monument. And there's one really important one. It's called the entrance stone. It's right at the entrance to the passageway. Francesca, can you point out the entrance stone? It's a black there. So the last job we have to do before it goes into the oven is to make those stones. So again, it's the exact same process. We're just going to make a snake, but this time the snake will be about the thickness of the pencil again. And she's just going to cut, again, pinky finger size pieces. And every time she cuts one, she's just going to place it on one of those. Sorry, the first one she's going to place is the entrance stone. And then she's going to place all the others all the way around. And remember, guys, if you don't have the template, I'm just going to tell you how many you need to do. You need to do the entrance stone plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 stones. So if you haven't got them, just put 12 stones around. That's how many there are still standing there.
Do they need to be all the same size?
No, they can be just random size, because some of them are huge and some of them are small. So you finish your corbelled roof and then start this. This part is actually a really easy part to do. If you're ready, you need to turn the oven onto the fan oven or your normal oven. And you need to put it to 150 degrees Celsius, which is gas mark 2, or 300 degrees Fahrenheit if you have so 150 degrees Celsius. So not very hot, but still hot. And it's going to go in the oven for an hour and a half. And we're just going to sit here and Lisanne will tell stories for an hour and a half.
No.
Then we need 5 hours for it to cool, so Lisanne will tell us stories for 5 hours.
I'd love to, guys, but you'd get so bored.
So it needs to be an adult. Get one of the adults in the house to turn on the oven for you. Thank you very much for the reminder.
And use the conventional oven. Don't use the fan.
Okay.
Otherwise, it will. I did that mistake. I made that mistake, and it kind of
gets puffy.
Gets puffy, exactly.
Okay. So, what we need to do is to get a baking tray, and we're going to slide our baking paper onto the baking tray. This is a slightly tricky one, but that's why it was handy to have the cardboard underneath it. So this goes onto a baking tray and then it goes into the oven the way it is.
Yeah, something like this.
So obviously the template paper doesn't go in the oven, just the greaseproof paper and the thing, and that goes in the oven. You have one more task to do to prepare our model, which is to prepare our front cover, our cover of the model, because of course that's not what Newgrange looks like now. Francesca's going to make a snake, one more snake, the last snake, but it's going to be a thick snake, about the thickness of a marker.
Can I just say, guys, I want you to keep these models because we're going to do more on Newgrange in a couple of weeks. and because it wasn't enough to do. So keep your models for a couple of weeks, all right? We're going to come back and do some more cool stuff on it, all right? All right, a thick marker, is it, Steve?
Yeah. And this time you don't have to cut it into little bits. You just need to cut it into a piece that's about the length that Francesca's showing there, about 6 or 7 centimeters long. This is to make this is going to be making the front, you know, the bit that's all white on Newgrange. This is to make that. So if you guys have some salt left over, you need to put the salt on it first. Pour some salt on, and the best salt for this is actually coarse salt. So if you have some coarse salt, I know some of you will have to rush to get that. If you have some salt left over, just squish it, pour it on top, and that's our quartz.
And I just know that some of people won't have any dough left, in which case they can just put theirs in the oven. And the video you're going to show, Steve, is going to show them how to paint, right?
Yeah.
But this is a different way, if you have extra dough, of making the front of Newgrange. If you notice in the chat, what she's making is the quartz that goes on the front of Newgrange. Like you can see behind me, the monument behind me, it's largely white in the front, but then it has those lovely little black stones. What are you going to use for the black stones, Steve?
What we found worked very well was peppercorns. But yeah.
Cool, peppercorns. Delicious.
And you just need a few of them. I wouldn't eat them as well. Your mouth will burn.
Oh, the Dagda used to didn't have any peppercorns to have in his cauldron of plenty. Salt and pepper. Right, Steve, do you want to explain that?
Yep. So what Francesca is doing is she's putting a few of the salt on for the quartz, and then a few black peppercorns. So just if you need to grab some salt, go grab some salt and just squish it in. And this is going to be the front part of the Newgrange, the bit that's all quartzy. An interesting fact about this is that when they found Newgrange a few hundred years ago, after it had been abandoned by the people who used it, thousands of years ago it was abandoned and just sort of it became part of the hill. Nobody knew it was there. It was just a sort of mound on the hill. And when the archaeologists found it, the quartz wasn't the way it looks like now in the monument. That's how Michael O'Kelly believes it looked when they made it. Now, what is true is that all of the quartz that was there was found at the site. It was found scattered all around the front of the monument. But some archaeologists disagree and don't think it would have looked like that at all. And if you go to Meath, the quartz isn't in the front, it's actually laid on the ground outside it. So we don't exactly know how it was, but that's what Michael O'Kelly thought. So once you have those two snakes done, those two, it looks like an iced cake, but it definitely isn't. What you have to do is you have to pick them up and put them on the front of the monument like that. Put them on top of the curbstones, and it's sort of like a smile on the top of the monument. So when Francesca's done that, she'll take her camera off and show you what it looks like from the front.
Yeah, and don't worry if the salt comes down. It's happening to me as well.
And also don't worry, make sure you don't cover it doesn't have to go over the passage. Leave a gap there, just put it either side. Cool. I think that looks just like Newgrange. In fact, I don't know whether your camera is on your model or on the real Newgrange. It's that authentic. It goes in the oven for an hour and a half. Isn't that right, Francesca?
Yes, and then you can leave it outside the oven, and it will cool off and harden as well.
If you don't have enough dough, then don't do this stage here. Don't make the front part.
There is another way to make
There's another way to
it.
do it.
No worries.
I made my model without doing this part.
Stephen, show us your model if you have it there.
Okay. So the last bit we're going to do before we go, guys, is
Hold it higher. Yeah.
we're going to show you how to make this part, which is our cover, which is the grass cover. And do you see the way I don't have on my model, I don't have the front part the way Francesca did it. I used my template and I just put dots on it. So mine covers up like this. Just a different way of doing it.
This template.
I'm just going back to Francesca, that template there. Yeah, do you want to show us how to do that, Francesca?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the last thing we're going to do is Francesca's going to explain this part, and then I'm going to just show you how to paint.
Okay, so take your template for the cover.
If you don't have a template, then basically all you're doing is making a shape that's about 1 centimeter bigger all the way around than the model you've made. So see the way Francesca's holding it over there? It's the same shape, it's just about 1 centimeter bigger all the way around. Okay.
So you just draw it, okay? And then if you have the template, you just cut around the thick line. And then color it in green.
Yeah.
With different, like Newgrange is, the mound is covered in grass. So you just color in green, leaving this part white. And you can color it in many different shades of green, of course. I'll just do a quick thing now. But just go with different greens. And then cut this line of the triangle that is here, and just cut one line like this. And then remove this gray part, cutting, following the dotted lines. See? And cut here where the dotted lines are. And here, and here, and here. So you basically have white flaps. Okay? Now you only have to glue a little bit, put a little bit of glue in the white triangle like this. And make it disappear like this. And then draw some black spots in the white left in your cover like this, and fold your flaps. That will make the white entrance, the white front of Newgrange. Correct, Steve? And then you will put it over. When it's out of the oven and it's cooled down, you can put your cover over your model.
So when it comes out of the oven, all of these stones will fall into random places because, of course, they don't stay stuck in the place you put them. So, but they're all of your stones and all of your curb stones and your passage stones and your roof stones. So all the things we made out of snakes, they're all painted gray because they're mostly made out of stone called gray wacky, which is gray and wacky. And then I colored my basin stones brown in there. And then I colored the mound, a mixture of green and brown and gray. And I just put mine, you see I have mine on a nice circle? I stuck my stones down on the circle and I painted the circle gray. The reason I have a circle is I ate a pizza for lunch yesterday and I had the base of it. So that's like Sana and Francesca and I said, we have a video of how to do this and you can watch that. It takes a few minutes to watch and then you can have your model made like that. And please don't forget when you're done to send us photographs, and also send us photographs of the different stages of how it looks in the oven and all the different stages, as many photographs as possible, because I really want to see how your models turned out. Okay.
Yeah, guys, please do send us photographs. I'm looking forward to seeing them all, and we're going to pick up the story of Newgrange again in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And thank you for all the ones who stayed with us all the way.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys, for joining us for this session. I hope you had a lot of fun, and I hope to see you all the next session. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Nice to see you. Bye. See you next time.
Bye.